It all began with a question that had lingered in the shadows, a question that no one dared to ask aloud. What truly happens inside a coffin after burial? This question, wrapped in fear and mystery, was once considered taboo. For centuries, people speculated, theorized, and pondered the unknown, but no one had the courage or the means to seek the truth. The very thought of delving into it seemed unfathomable. But then, something changed. A group of groundbreaking scientists, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, decided to take on the unthinkable. They weren't just any scientists, they were visionaries, pioneers willing to venture into an area that had remained untouched by human curiosity. With cutting-edge technology and an unwavering determination, they crafted a plan that could unlock one of life's most profound and unsettling mysteries. Their idea was simple, yet radical. Install a small, nearly invisible camera inside a coffin. It was an audacious proposition, but one that promised to provide answers to questions that had haunted humanity for centuries. But why would they do this? Was it sheer curiosity, a thirst for knowledge, or was there something darker, a deep obsession with the unknown? The lead scientist, Dr. Emily Hartman, explained the mission like this: "We're not here to frighten people. We're here to answer the questions we've all been too afraid to face." Her words were calm, but behind them was a sense of urgency, a belief that uncovering the truth was more important than the fears and uncertainties surrounding it. Despite their noble intentions, the project was met with fierce resistance. Religious groups, ethics committees, and even the scientists' own families begged them to abandon the experiment. Some called it disrespectful, others labeled it as dangerous. But the team, undeterred, pressed forward. They believed they were on the brink of a discovery that could forever alter humanity's understanding of life, death, and everything in between. Months of preparation followed. It wasn't just about the technology. They had to find someone willing to participate in this groundbreaking experiment. Someone who was brave enough to let their final moments be captured on film. Someone who would allow their coffin to become the stage for a camera that would broadcast their journey to the other side. The team knew that finding such a person wouldn't be easy. It took weeks before a volunteer stepped forward. His name was Samuel Grayson. At 82 years old, Samuel was a retired school teacher with a calm demeanor, a man who had lived a full life. He had loved, he had lost, and he had taught countless lessons to eager young minds in the classrooms he once filled. But now Samuel was nearing the end of his own journey. He had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and he knew that his days were numbered. When Samuel was approached about the experiment, everyone expected him to refuse, to balk at the idea of becoming part of something so controversial. But to their surprise, he accepted the challenge with quiet grace. "If my passing can help answer questions that have haunted humanity for generations," he said, his voice steady, "then it's worth it." His words were simple, but they carried an unspoken sadness, the weight of knowing that he was not just giving up his life, but offering it for a cause much greater than himself. However, not everyone shared his resolve. Samuel's family was devastated by his decision. When he explained his reasoning to his children and grandchildren, tears flowed freely. His youngest daughter, Maria, was especially distraught. She couldn't understand why her father would choose this path. "Dad, why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this? Isn't it enough that we're losing you? Why add this circus to your final moments?" Samuel, with the wisdom only age could bring, took her hands in his. His gaze was steady, and there was a peace in his eyes that only deepened the emotional intensity of the moment. "Maria," he said softly, "I'm not afraid of what comes next, but maybe, just maybe, this will help others face it with a little less fear. That's my gift to you and to the world." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. They silenced the room, but they did not take away the pain. Reluctantly, Samuel's family agreed, knowing that once their father made up his mind, there was no changing it. On the day Samuel signed the agreement, the scientists were humbled. It was not just their technology that made this experiment possible. It was the incredible courage of one man willing to face death head-on for the sake of humanity's understanding. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Samuel's bravery would inspire the world in ways no one could have foreseen. The real question remained: what would they find inside that coffin? What truths, what revelations would emerge from this unprecedented experiment? Before we dive deeper into this chilling story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Stories like this are rare, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Trust me, you'll be haunted by the revelations that are about to unfold. Stay with us. The truth is waiting to be uncovered. Dr. Hartman, who had witnessed countless participants withdraw from far less daunting experiments, said, "Samuel's bravery goes beyond anything I've ever seen. He's not just a volunteer, he's a true hero." As the day of the burial drew closer, Samuel spent his final days reflecting on his decision, making peace with it in his own way. He visited old friends, shared heartfelt stories with his grandchildren, and even joked about how he might become famous after he was gone. But beneath his humor lay something far deeper, a quiet yet unshakable resolve. Samuel knew what was at stake. The night before the experiment began, he recorded a video message for the scientists, his voice steady but filled with purpose. In it, he said, "If this works, don't let fear stop you from sharing what you discover. The world deserves to know the truth, even if it's not what they want to hear." What no one could have foreseen was that Samuel's final act of courage would lead to the discovery of something far more terrifying and far more meaningful than anyone could have imagined. The stage was set. The countdown had begun. Samuel Grayson had unwittingly become a part of a mystery that would haunt humanity forever. The day of the burial arrived, heavy and gray. The sky above mirrored the somber mood that had settled over the gathered crowd. Samuel Grayson's family stood in solemn silence, clutching one another tightly as they watched his casket being carefully prepared for burial. Tears streamed down their faces, but beneath the sorrow was something more, a quiet strength, a determination to honor Samuel's wishes, no matter how unconventional they seemed. For the scientists, the tension was unbearable. This was no ordinary experiment. This was uncharted territory, pushing the boundaries of science itself. As the funeral service proceeded, their hearts raced, knowing that the success of their entire project depended on a flawless execution. The camera, smaller than a matchbox and nearly undetectable, had already been installed inside the casket the night before. Its lens faced inward, silently poised to capture whatever might unfold once the coffin was lowered into the ground. The burial service was simple, but deeply emotional. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees as the priest spoke words of comfort. "Samuel Grayson was a man who touched countless lives," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Even in his final moments, his spirit remained unwavering. The scientists stood at a respectful distance, their presence blending into the background of the ceremony. When the moment arrived, Samuel's casket was slowly lowered into the freshly dug grave. The sound of the winch creaked loudly in the still air, each turn of the wheel sending chills down the spines of those watching. Then, the first shovelful of earth hit the wooden lid with a muffled thud. Inside the coffin, the camera recorded every sound: the soft, distant murmurs of the grieving crowd, the rhythmic patter of dirt falling, and finally, the oppressive silence that descended once the grave was sealed. The darkness inside the casket was absolute. Back in the laboratory, the scientists sat transfixed in front of their monitors. The camera feed, now live, was eerily still. A faint green glow from the night vision filter illuminated the interior of the coffin. At first, there was nothing but the quiet stillness of death. The team exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what they were waiting for. Hours passed, yet the feed remained uneventful, and still an unshakable feeling of dread hung heavy in the air. Dr. Hartman glanced at the clock, her expression unreadable. "It's just the beginning," she whispered. Her words hung in the room, almost like a prophecy, as everyone waited, hoping yet dreading what might come next. Meanwhile, in the cemetery, the wind began to pick up, rustling the branches of the nearby trees. Samuel's family lingered at the gravesite a little longer, reluctant to leave. They were drawn to the solemnity of the moment, but they could not ignore the cold that had suddenly settled over the land. It was as though the earth itself had taken a deep breath, holding it in suspense. Back underground, the camera remained focused on the interior of the coffin, still and waiting, watching. For a while, nothing happened. The scientists who had been monitoring the situation closely began to relax, feeling the initial tension ease. The first moments after the burial unfolded exactly as they had anticipated: silent, still, and lifeless. The camera feed, transmitted in eerie green night vision, showed nothing but the dark, unmoving interior of the coffin. There were no signs of life. The air in the lab felt thick with anticipation. For the first hour, there was nothing, not a sound, not a movement. The team of scientists gathered around the monitors were on edge. The hum of the equipment was the only noise filling the room, a reminder of their isolation. As the clock ticked away, they logged their observations. No activity detected. Some of them started to relax, convincing themselves that the experiment would ultimately offer only a somber confirmation of what they already knew. There would be no signs of life, nothing out of the ordinary. The process of decay would simply continue in silence. But by the third hour, the atmosphere in the lab began to shift. The team grew restless. One technician leaned back in his chair, stretched, and yawned. "Guess it's just going to be a really long night," he muttered, trying to break the tension. Dr. Hartman, however, remained focused. She kept her eyes fixed on the monitor, not allowing herself to lose concentration. "Don't assume," she warned softly, her voice steady. "This is only the beginning." And she was right. At exactly the 6-hour mark, a faint tap broke the silence. It was so subtle that at first the team thought they had imagined it. They froze, listening. But then the sound came again, a soft, deliberate tap. Louder this time. The room fell silent as everyone leaned in, staring at the screen. The tapping came again, and this time it was unmistakable. It was a rhythmic, almost deliberate sound, like knuckles brushing gently against wood. One of the scientists, his voice barely a whisper, asked, "Is that?" His words trailed off, unsure. Dr. Hartman raised a hand, signaling for silence. "Wait," she said, her voice calm but firm. The tapping continued, growing more rhythmic with each passing second. Tap, 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 pause, tap. It wasn't random. There was a pattern. The team exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what they were hearing. "Could it be settling sounds?" one of the technicians asked nervously. His face, however, betrayed his uncertainty. "No," Dr. Hartman replied firmly. "That's not natural. That's intentional." The room grew still as the team scrambled to analyze the audio. They amplified the feed, running it through filters, trying to get a clearer picture. The tapping stopped, but the silence that followed was quickly replaced by a new sound, a faint scrape. It was so subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a soft, eerie sound, like fabric brushing against wood. The hairs on the back of the team's necks stood up as the sound sent chills down their spines. "What is that?" another scientist whispered, his voice barely audible. The air in the room seemed to grow colder. It was as if the very atmosphere was responding to the growing tension. Then, at the 8-hour mark, something more chilling happened. A low, guttural sound filled the speakers, a noise that resembled a faint moan. It was unnatural, unearthly, and it sent waves of fear racing down their spines. Dr. Hartman leaned forward in her chair, her face pale but resolute. "This isn't interference," she said in a low voice. "This is real." The team exchanged uneasy glances, their faces filled with fear and uncertainty. They were on the edge, unsure whether to continue or to abandon the experiment. Fear crept into their minds, but curiosity was a stronger force. They had to know what was happening. As the hours dragged on, the sounds became more sporadic, taps, faint whispers, and strange, subtle movements. Yet the camera continued to show nothing. It was maddening. The juxtaposition of these eerie sounds, so vivid and unsettling, with the unmoving, lifeless image on the screen, only deepened the mystery. And then, as the 24th hour approached, something unthinkable happened. The camera feed flickered. For a brief moment, it cut out entirely. The team watched in stunned silence, unsure of what had just occurred. When the feed returned, they froze. There, in the corner of the coffin, was something they had not seen before, a shadow, small, subtle, but undeniably there. One of the scientists stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, "Is something in there with him?" Dr. Hartman didn't answer. Her hands trembled as she rewound the footage, watching the moment the shadow appeared over and over again. She stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. The room fell into a deep, tense silence, as if everyone was afraid to breathe. No one knew what to make of it. What had they just witnessed? Was it just a trick of the light, or was it something far more sinister? The questions hung in the air, unanswered. And yet, one thing was certain. They were no longer dealing with an ordinary experiment. Something had changed. Something had been unleashed. "What's happening down there?" A scientist's voice trembled, fear overtaking his usual professionalism. Dr. Hartman took a deep breath, her eyes locked on the monitor, unwilling to look away. "I don't know," she admitted quietly, her voice strained. "But whatever it is, we're not alone." The first 24 hours had come to a chilling close, leaving everyone uneasy, but the true nightmare had only just begun. By the 30th hour, the team was on edge, their nerves frayed by exhaustion and dread. As they continued to monitor the live feed, the unease among the group grew. The hours of watching the static, unchanging footage were beginning to take their toll. The exhaustion of staring at the screens was made worse by a deep sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air. Everyone was still trying to make sense of the strange shadow they had seen the previous night. It had been analyzed frame by frame, but the results were far from clear. Some members of the team believed it was merely a trick of the light, an illusion created by faulty equipment or a shift in the shadows. Others, however, were convinced that it was something far more sinister, something that couldn't be explained away so easily. Then, just when they thought the situation couldn't get any worse, the unexplainable began to unfold right before their eyes. It started subtly, a faint movement in the bottom corner of the screen, so faint, in fact, that it took a few moments for anyone to notice. "Wait, did that just move?" one technician blurted out in disbelief, his voice barely above a whisper as he pointed toward the monitor. The entire room fell silent. Their eyes were fixed on the screen, watching as the faint green glow of the night vision illuminated the inside of the coffin. It had been perfectly still just moments before. Now, though, something was different. The corner of the burial shroud seemed to shift, ever so slightly, as if it were being tugged by an unseen force. "Play that back," Dr. Hartman ordered, her voice trembling with both fear and urgency. As the footage rewound, the team saw it again. The shroud had moved, disturbed by something invisible. But there was no visible source, nothing to explain it. As they watched in horror, the movement became more pronounced. The fabric of the shroud twisted and pulled in short, jerky motions, almost as if it were alive. It was no longer a simple shift. The shroud was being manipulated by something or someone that they could not see. And then came the sound, a low, scraping noise, like fingernails dragging across wood. "Is something trying to get out?" one of the scientists whispered, his voice thick with fear. The scraping grew louder, more frantic. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, as if something or someone was desperately clawing at the coffin lid, trying to escape. The team watched in horror, unable to look away. Then the microphone picked up something else, faint, guttural noises, almost like muffled cries, barely audible, but unmistakably human. But that wasn't the worst part. At hour 34, the camera feed flickered violently. For just a split second, the screen went black, and then, when the image returned, the team gasped in unison. What they saw made their blood run cold. There, in the middle of the coffin, was a clear imprint on the burial shroud. It was the outline of a hand, an unmistakable shape, with fingers splayed wide, pressed firmly against the fabric, as if something beneath the shroud had reached out. The team froze, each of them too afraid to speak. The image remained for just a moment before it slowly began to fade, as though the hand was retreating back into the void from which it came. "What are we looking at?" a technician asked, his voice cracking with panic. Dr. Hartman could only shake her head, unable to speak. She had no answer. The realization of what they were witnessing, a phenomenon that couldn't be explained, left her paralyzed with fear. The footage continued to play, but the activity only grew more horrifying with each passing minute. The sounds became more intense, groans, whispers, and the unmistakable creak of wood shifting under pressure filled the room. The tension was unbearable. Everyone was on edge, afraid of what might come next, but nothing could prepare them for what happened at hour 36. The camera captured something that sent the entire team into a spiral of disbelief. A mist-like substance began to form inside the coffin. It swirled, gathering together, slowly coalescing into a faint, human-like shape. It hovered just above the shroud. Its features were indistinct, blurry, like a fading memory, but it was undeniably present. The shape seemed to pulse, struggling to maintain its form, as though it were fighting against some invisible force. The scientists watched in stunned silence, unable to move, unable to speak. One technician began to cry softly, the terror overwhelming him. What is that?" someone whispered, their voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might make the apparition disappear. The mist lingered for several long minutes, twisting and shifting in the air above the shroud, before it began to dissipate. Slowly it faded away, leaving the coffin empty once more. But the damage had already been done. The footage had captured something that defied all logic, all scientific understanding. What they had witnessed was beyond anything they could have prepared for. The room was filled with a heavy silence as the team sat in stunned shock, unable to comprehend what they had just seen. Finally, Dr. Hartman broke the silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper, filled with a fear that she had never felt before. We have to get out of here," she said. This is not just a mistake. This is something we don't understand." But even as she spoke, deep down, each of them knew the truth. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What they had seen was only the beginning. This isn't just an experiment anymore. It's something we were never meant to witness. The footage that began as a simple test had pushed the boundaries of reality, taking the scientists beyond the realm of understanding. What had they unleashed? And yet, even more shocking revelations were still to come. By hour 48, the tension in the lab was unbearable. The team had watched, helpless, as the unthinkable unfolded. But no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what was about to happen. Every eye was glued to the monitor. The faint, ghostly glow of the coffin's interior cast unsettling shadows across the anxious faces of the team. Dr. Hartman, who had remained calm and composed throughout the experiment, now seemed uneasy. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "We've pushed too far. Maybe some questions aren't meant to be answered." The room grew silent. The coffin's feed remained eerily still, offering no answers, only silence, no movement, no sound, just an oppressive stillness that had started to feel unnatural. Some of the scientists began to hold on to hope, thinking that whatever had been happening might be over. But then, at precisely the 49th hour, the screen flickered again. The image returned, and the team gasped in unison. The coffin, which had once been empty except for Samuel's lifeless body, now seemed altered. The burial shroud that had once been neatly in place now appeared to have shifted, as though disturbed by some unseen force. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. No, the true horror lay in what came next. On the interior lid of the coffin, faint letters began to appear, etched slowly into the surface as though by an invisible hand. The camera captured every agonizing second as the words grew clearer. "Why am I here?" The air in the lab thickened, becoming heavy, suffocating. Every person in the room felt it. The pressure was almost unbearable. "This has to be a glitch," one technician stammered. But deep down, no one truly believed that. No one dared to. Before anyone could fully process the scene, the coffin's feed erupted in a loud, static-filled screech. The screen went dark. Panic spread through the room as the team scrambled to restore the feed. Their hands shook as they worked frantically, the clock ticking away as if mocking them. And when the image returned, it was worse than they could have imagined. Samuel's body was gone. The coffin was now empty, save for the burial shroud, which lay crumpled in the corner. A collective gasp filled the room. "This isn't possible," someone shouted, their voice cracking in terror. "He was there. We all saw him." Dr. Hartman stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the screen. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible sight before her with everything she knew about science, the natural world, and the laws that govern it. But no explanation came. Then, as if the situation wasn't already disturbing enough, the audio feed picked up something that froze everyone in place. A faint, familiar voice. "Thank you." It was Samuel's voice. The room went cold. The team exchanged horrified looks, trying desperately to understand what they were hearing. "He's talking," one scientist whispered, his voice barely audible. The words came again, clearer this time. "Thank you for letting me go." The screen flickered once more, and then utter silence. The feed cut out completely. No matter what the team did, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't restore the connection. The experiment was over, but it had left behind far more questions than answers. In the days that followed, the team re-watched the footage over and over, searching for some kind of explanation, some clue that might shed light on the madness they had witnessed. But no scientific analysis could make sense of what had happened. The coffin was exhumed, but Samuel's body was never found. Dr. Hartman, once a woman of unwavering logic and reason, could no longer deny what had occurred. She stood before the team, shaken, and said in a somber tone, "We thought we were exploring the unknown, but the truth is, the unknown was watching us too." The findings from the experiment were never made public. They were buried, just like Samuel's empty grave. But for those who had witnessed it firsthand, the memory would haunt them forever. Sometimes the answers we seek are not meant to be found, and sometimes those answers find us instead. What do you think happened to Samuel in that coffin? Could there be an explanation that we're simply not ready to accept? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you want more stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew, be sure to hit that subscribe button.